Yes, that's going to be everyone, guys. So I'm going to start a bit early here today. Most of my talk is actually not about Perl. It's more about what. So it is a while Perl talk. So what I'll be talking today mostly about is what the problem is with medical research right now in Canada. That's why, hence the maple syrups, and what we are trying to do, and why we decided to go and start using Perl. So before I start, and forgive the state of the slides, I can't get internet working right now, so my original talk is somewhere else. But I don't really need the slides that much. I just wanted to get my point across a little bit more in a little bit more of a comfortable talk than usual. So I started Perl 2009. I started working on a module called SDL Perl, which if many people don't know about, it's about Perl gaming. Currently, I'm doing my master's in biomedical engineering. So that means I do some research. I'm a researcher. And the area that I look at specifically is the area between the disconnect between medical frontline and what's happening in pharmaceutical companies in terms of clinical trials. So that's a bit of the boring part, but using this kind of problem area, I started a startup that we're working on right now. And what I wanted to talk to you about is Kanakistan. Kanakistan is north of here. Some people like to call it Canada, but really, in terms of medical research, it's a dictatorship. So that's why I call it Kanakistan. Medical research in Canada is very linear. You start a process, you finish the process, you start the next process, you finish the next process, and each single process has startup costs, which are the exact same for each component of the process. The reason why we have some insane stuff like this, is because we have a very conservative software ecosystem. People in Canada who have the ability to buy and bring in new software don't have the balls to buy and bring in new software. So what happens is when people run clinical trials in Canada, and just briefly, a clinical trial is the gold standard for getting any new medical device, pharmaceutical, or anything related with doing anything to humans through the system so you can actually start selling it. So clinical trials is how things are done. And for the most part, clinical trials run well, except when you need to look at up-to-date information. Very little of the front-end medical real-time information is ever used in a clinical trial, because clinical trials, as I mentioned, are linear. They take maybe 8 months just to get started, then they take another year, 2 years, where you spend all this time looking at retrospective data, but by that time, the data set has already started changing. So you have a latency period. So for about 2 years, new stuff has been going on. New drugs are out on the market. Your demographic has changed. The biochemistry of your patients have changed. And this stuff is not available. No one's looking at it because it just takes so bloody long. So we started looking into, me and my partner, we started looking into why is it hard to get real-time information coming out of the front end. First of all, it's hard to access. And it has something to do with forms and transference. And what I mean by transference is getting data from one person to another person. In Canada right now, even in the U.S., in some states, everything's pen and paper, even though there's an electronic system on the side. When they have an electronic system, they're still based on some of the designs that were done way back in the 80s, way back in the 90s. And what's happening with that is the technology is getting in the way, so people are actually going back and using pen and paper as a redundant system to what they're currently doing. So it is somewhat of a comfort feeling with physicians if they have the paper copy while they have their technology running in the back end. So most EMRs right now don't even bother having a good UI, because in the end they're just going to print it out and then shuffle the forms across the floor. So that means real-time information, to get any sort of data set out of that, you have to sift through about millions and millions of pieces of paper. And as a researcher, I've done this, not willingly, I've done this myself, where for 8 months we'd sit there and go back through every single paper copy of a patient. And the problem with the paper copy is they're not accurate at all. Because when a surgeon writes anything down on an operative note, or a physician writes anything down on an operative note, it scribbles, and if it's not scribble, it's inaccurate. And if it's inaccurate, if it's not inaccurate, then maybe you somehow found the lost unicorn of Narnia somewhere. So that data set just sucks. So that's one of the big reasons why real-time data is not being brought into clinical trials. So what happens when a clinical trial finishes off is they realize, oh, we have another data set to go through. So they have a huge money drain. It's a huge effort drain. It's just a huge drain. And the solution, well, it's not as simple as making something better. So here's a little story time today. And what I'll be talking about is Oscar. It's open source, Canadian, whatever it is. But basically, this was one of the better systems for EMRs that was done in Brazil. It was done in Argentina. It was done somewhere in Europe. And one of my colleagues, or someone who's helping us out with this, said, well, we tried to bring this over. It's completely free. The only cost is the setup cost and integration cost. And they had good talks going on with the Juvenile Research Foundation, which is one of the big foundations that does clinical trials in Canada. And it went nowhere. People sat on it for about 2 years, 2 to 3 years, 4 years. Nothing happened. So the solution is not necessarily better technology. Because the problem over here is about adoption. And how do you necessarily solve adoption? And one of the ways you can solve adoption is with critical mass. And what I mean by critical mass is the threshold of new software used by the users in the environment that are using it, but a lot faster, and for very little cost. And so what we're trying to do is get critical mass of clinicians starting to use it, to get a critical mass of strategic partnership, because as a small company in Canada, you don't necessarily have the credibility to push the product through into the medical ecosystem. And there's a lot of other problems there, but basically critical mass is build something cheaper, build something uglier, build something fast, but get it out there. So now we have a goal for the technology, and the technology is speed and integration, and that's duct tape. So that's where Perl comes in. So what we've done so far are a bunch of Perl pilots where we just glued stuff together really quickly. So we have a modular assist, KLQDB, and React pilot that's running as a cardiac pilot. We have a Catalyst and a very simple SQLite that's running as a radiology pilot. Then we have a very insane Java plus modular assist plus WebSocket thing. That's a data analysis pilot that's running. Then we have something called 807, and 807 is the standard for, or supposed to be the standard for the healthcare system. And that's just plugged up with some very simple template Xlate, and that's another pilot, and et cetera, and et cetera. So the turnaround for each one of these pilots is about 2 to 4 weeks. So what we do is, when we first start out, and I have more slides on this, but I'll just talk about it now. What we do is, when we first start out, is we get basically simply the number of users, what forms the users are filling out, and at the end of the time, what type of database that they need to plug into. 3 things, and we just go. Because in most of these cases, the user has never seen a good design for the front end. For an EMR system, or for any requisition software. They've just never seen a good one, so they don't know what they want. And since they don't know what they want, we don't know what we are going to build until we get into the 3rd week and they say, well, I'm trying it out and this doesn't work for us. So when we started most of the pilots, we just started like a hodgepodge of a whole bunch of random modules that we're using. And now we're seeing the result after 10 months of doing this. And after a lot of coffee, we're seeing that we have a sort of framework that we can build around. And that's really what I wanted to get into today was about what I would envision the framework would look like. So most of the pilots that start, they have to start with a certain amount of flexibility. So that's why I'm using stuff like React. Many people don't know, React and DB are NoSQL kind of stores. So you can store like JSON objects, you can store simple text objects, which can store data, and you can do an elastic search on it. And an elastic search just goes really quickly through the JSON object, and it indexes it as you put it in. So that's where we're getting a lot of flexibility in terms of the data, because as I said, we don't know what the hell they want. They don't know what the hell they want. So what we do is we start out with very simple REST APIs, connect it up to something that's very flexible database-wise, and we can change the JSON objects as we go along. And then the JavaScript is the only bottleneck at that point, where the JavaScript's at the front end, and we change it as we go for how it should react to the data. So once we're doing this, and I can show an example of this. I should have had that started up. So this is, oops, sorry. So this is one of the Catalyst applications based on, Catalyst with the React. What the hell am I doing here? I'm trying to start my React thing. Oh, okay. Hold on, let me stuck here. Oh, there we go. Fucking English words and shit. Okay, so this is a very quick markup. This was done in about 4 to 5 weeks. It's a little bit longer than most of our turnarounds. Are you kidding me? What the hell? Run. Maybe I can just get internet. Try that out. Oh, great. Well, imagine that there's a very awesome looking stuff going on there. In the meantime, I'll just run another application. This should work. So this is a data analysis software with the Java jar file running in the background, and it has a job runner that calls the Java backend. And basically, this application was made. So this application, the way it works, it has a WebSocket front end, so it's using HTML5. It's very simple. It was made really quickly because there's a clinical trial starting in about a couple of weeks now, and we jumped on at basically looking at convergence of correlations in the data set. So what happens is someone puts up a CSV file, and the CSV file is basically a bunch of numbers with the X and Y data set. So they upload the CSV file, and it goes and runs along. And when it starts, and it should be going up, what? Yeah. So the job runner picks it up, and it starts running it. So it starts running the Java software for a statistics algorithm that it's running. It finishes it off, and it randomly picks data out of the data set that was given, and it does the correlation strength of it. So the alternative for doing this would be sitting there with pen and paper and running linear regression, running a whole bunch of other statistical measures across randomly sampled data sets, which are done manually on real-time data. The value of this is the CSV format is very simple, and most of the real-time stuff can be captured in your CSV format. And we built another application, the application I was going to show you earlier. What it does is it looks at what is critical medical information in any given report. So if you're coming in for knee surgery, the doctor writes down your name, which is not really important, we don't care about, your age, and a whole bunch of other demographics. Then he writes down in free form what is wrong with you, what were the complications, what was the treatment done to you, and all that. But in that free form, they have a mental template that they go through saying, well, I need to talk about this complication, I need to talk about that complication. And that mental template can be digitized as just a very HTML form where they only enter the critical medical information, and then the next thing that they do, next thing that the software does, it puts it into a free format looking template. So now things are more standardized, and already from the get-go, things are separated out. And from that information, we can do stuff like this, where we're looking at correlation strength across random samples. So that 5 seconds of whatever I did, although it looks very simple, that's about 12 to 2 years of work if you were doing it manually. Which sounds really retarded because that's not really mind-bogglingly, mind-breaking stuff. It's not really hard to make. But again, going back to the adoption problem, it's not about better technology. If you look at the code for this, it's crap. It just looks good. The adoption is the problem because the people who say it's a good software are not necessarily the people buying it. So the clinicians that are end up going to use something like this, they're going to say, yeah, this is great, blah, 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 but it's not up to us to buy anything. So now you're stuck in a kind of conundrum of how you can get stuff into the hospital, even when it's open source, even when it's free. How do you get stuff into the hospital? And that's where Perl was one of the reasons why we're using it. And with that, with over 10 months of work, we started, as I mentioned, 2 of the cardiac pilots. We finished our radiology requisition format, I guess that's pretty much it. And I'll take some questions. There's your maple syrup.
Question?
Yeah.
What kind of obstacles do you run into with like the IT staff?
Yeah, so that's one of the big problems. With the IT staff, they all usually have some of their own technology that they're running. So they say, well, we're only going to take Oracle, which is fine for us. We just switch over to SQL when we certify the application. But the very strange thing that people run into is they say, well, we're not necessarily sure how this software works, but it's open source, and other people know how to work, and we're not comfortable with that. And I'm like, I don't know why there's an uncomfortable, just because the source is open, just because they don't know how to read it, but someone else does, they have a certain amount of uncomfortable feeling with that. And it's something that we're working on. So what we are trying to do is, we're saying we have a dual license, which we really don't. It is basically saying that part of this code is closed until you accept to open it. So it works so we're working in conjunction with the IT partners for most of the hospitals and saying, okay, if you do want this application, which we're saying about 78% of your clinicians are using it right now for free. What we do is we just put it up on a very simple access point, a server, and then they can use it on their iPad as they're walking around in their own department. So we get about 70 to 80% of them using it, which is the cardiac pilot that we do, that we're trying to do now. Get them using it, and then go to the IT staff and say, well, we have them all using it, so it is useful right now. This is how much money you save. And then at that point, it shifts over from the IT staff over to the administration and the people who sit on the board that are making decisions on the software. And at that point, most of the people on the board are the people who are using it for free. So it becomes easier and easier as it goes, but it's still a very complicated problem because stuff bought in a hospital goes through a lot of scrutiny, and people don't want to start that process. That process is just a pain in the ass process to start. And we're trying to simplify things as much as possible, but it's still going to be a way uphill battle. And that's one of the reasons that I want to start working on an open source framework where you can build up the value for it, even though technology is not the greatest, adoption criteria. It just shouldn't be a hindrance to. So I kind of went off on your question there, but I hope that answers what I was trying to say. Any other questions?
So your method of critical mass, trying to make sure that everybody wants it and everybody's using it. So, so they just, have you had success, or has anybody had success with that before, or is that just your theory?
People have had success with that before, and what I mean by success, they were kind of sneaky about it. One company, I'm not sure what their name is, they got a whole bunch of doctors using it, but then they switched over to a monthly subscription fee. And the doctors went, well, we're not paying for that. So they go, well, yeah, would the IT department buy a bunch of licenses and do that? That has been successful, but that was the first time they ever tried it. I don't think that would happen again. So we're trying to do a very open book. So we talk to everyone in the hospital that we work at. My partner is a medical student there. So we talk to the residents, we talk to pretty much everyone we can say, and we say, you know what, honestly, we're just trying to do this because it's better to do. But then in the process of doing that, we realized, okay, you have to set up a company, you have to do this. So we became a startup after the fact of what we wanted to do. So we started out with a very simple solution that we wanted to just get this thing and see what it would be like. But again, as I mentioned, there's a lot of scrutiny with software coming into the hospital. So to survive the scrutiny, you need some amount of capital in terms of way developers. We're going to do the documentation as well. So that's why you start building up some of the business part of the scrutiny. So it's a pretty ugly space, but it's like a very tough cookie to crack. And well, I've always loved challenges, so that's what I'm doing.
Where's your business model now? How do you get paid?
We get paid by basically installation. We're putting it into the hospital, moving on, and doing the same thing with other hospitals. So the first one is very expensive. We don't make any money out of it. And we're not making any money. The next one, because it was just down the road, different hospital, but pretty much the same stuff, same type of staff. Reselling it wouldn't be as hard. And that's pretty much the business model right now. Yep.
Alex and Ray, like, are you familiar with Red Cap?
Sorry?
Are you familiar with Red Cap?
Red Cap?
REDCIP?
Oh, CFD? No, I'm not sure. I guess I don't know.
CAP, yeah. Well, you should look at it because it's a popular software in this country. It's put up by some university that does clinical trials.
Right.
But it was very, very specific to MySQL.
Oh, okay.
This is why I didn't want to do it because I wanted to interface with Oracle.
Yeah.
The current product is less database specific. You have an advantage there.
I think we try to keep the data back in very agnostic software. We deal only in REST and JSON, so anything to be able to do a very quick REST module that we set up. But the other thing I noticed is that although most of them do prefer Oracle or blah blah, when you first start out, you can't afford the licenses and all that stuff to just build it up. So usually they're going, well, if you want the software, you have to pay me for it to build it. And that's somewhat of a stumbling block for a lot of IT departments like and so what you end up having to do is you use what you can now, and then you solidify it once you get a Prince order, for example, and you solidify it down into a single database that they want to get their company. But as I mentioned, most of the things that we're making right now are made in about 2 or 3 weeks. They're not meant to be the end all of what the actual software is going to be. And it's just about building it up, showing it to people, and building that person out. Any other questions? Oh, sorry.
Just to purely for personal curiosity, where in Canada are you working on this?
London, Ontario, 2 hours south of.
I'm from Vancouver, so.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we'll take a while to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe the next episode. Any other questions? Oh.
How old is your company? And
10 to 11 months right now.
pardon?
10 to 11 months right now.
Oh,
We
it's
started.
very young.
Yeah, we just started last August, right after YAPC 2009, pretty much. Yeah.
So
we're coming.
what do you foresee the biggest challenge
The adoption is going to be the biggest cookie. The adoption that I talked about, adoption of the software, is probably going to be the biggest challenge because it's not necessarily a software problem. The software is a key component, but it's there's political, there's economical, there's a whole bunch of different things going on there that are really hard to get around. And I don't know if you can. I'm confident that we're trying to do the best thing that we can do now, but only in hindsight can I tell you I feel 100% confident that it was worthwhile doing what we did over there. Yeah. Anything else? All right.